A very good day to everyone. Thank you for joining me here today. This is a flipped webinar material to prepare you for the future of learning webinars that are organized by Innovators. My name is Flossie Chua, and I'm a project director at Project Zero, which is a research and development institute at Harvard University. The work that I do focuses on understanding how we can nurture good thinking and practices that develop the capacity for informed and positive action, whether you're a leader, an educator, or a learner. Today, I'll be sharing some findings from one of my research projects that explores emerging practices of progressive pedagogies in schools and the shared leadership structures in schools that support them. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Innovators for inviting me to share my work here, as well as all of you for your dedication to education and your willingness to experiment with new ways of learning in such complex and challenging times. Without further ado, let's begin by sharing my screen with you. Okay, so the project that this material comes from is called Idea to Action, which studies how we might more reliably bring good ideas into sustained action. A key finding from our work is that there are two main ways that one can create complex change in an organization. The first is to install an innovation, sort of like installing a new refrigerator. When we do that, the innovation remains stably in place, often requiring relatively little attention after a fairly brief launch period. These innovations may include making materials available online, establishing working groups in the schools, and even new ways of holding regular meetings. Inherently, there is nothing wrong with installing an innovation, especially when it stands a good chance of working. After all, simple is always good in our very complex world. The problem is that many new visions and practices do not slide easily into place. Everything is interacting with everything else, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. Some people embrace the change, others resist the change. Initial efforts to generate some momentum, may work, but over time, the system tends to backslide to something like where it started, often with sour feelings on everyone's part. Or the initiative eventually erodes because of competing ideas or simply other agendas are competing for our very limited time. Another way that this could happen is that a new practice is adopted, but gradually it drifts away from what was intended. Often there are unexpected and unwelcome side effects as well. So on our project, we have found that complex change demands an ecological lens. What do I mean by that? An ecological lens is one that acknowledges that there are multiple factors at work all the time when you change one part of a system. It acknowledges and works with positive forces and calms concerns without micromanaging, right? All the while, an ecological lens will remain alert and responsive to backsliding, erosion of ideas, drift from the original impetus, competition from other agendas, and unexpected side effects. When we think about this, 4 broad principles become important when you're trying to create change using an ecological lens. So let me share with you these 4 broad principles. The first is change friendly. The second is social. The third is visibility. And the fourth is emergence. So what do I mean by these? The change friendly principle, is basically refers to how an ecological change thrives on early setup of good conditions more than trying to fix things later on. So for example, some advice that we can give you is avoid having too many initiatives at the same time. They become competition for each other. Allow people to try things, not just discuss. Because, we all know that a lot of talk doesn't always translate into the walk. So caution, against the idea that we already know what's needed and what works. I think we hear this all the time. Try to establish safe risk What do we mean by that? They are usually low-risk spirit, small-scale steps, trying things in low-stakes settings with rapid adjustment cycles, which means that, it's falling forward or failing forward, always using what you've learned to try something again, so that there's not too much time between the innovations that you're trying. The third idea: celebrate modest progress and successes. And this is important because you don't want people to feel that they need to get to the end, before they are successful. Always build in small successes along the way. Normalize ups and downs in progress. Try to get people to see that what they're doing is critical to the success of the organization, and that failing is actually part of the journey that they're going to be taking. Also make needed resources, advice, expertise, or coaching readily available, because when change is complex, people need help, and you really do want to make sure that they get the help that they want. Also, ensure that whatever kinds of timetables and all that you have will allow people to meet, because that nothing beats meeting, whether virtually or in person, to actually express ideas, express puzzles, express reservations. Also, adjust your recognition, performance reviews, to foster and not to work against the initiative. Some principles that we know actually say things like, this is a change that is going to be happening. Tell me how we can help you move along in that change. And that becomes part of their performance review, which, is standards that you set for yourself rather than somebody else determines that it's important for you to do. And the last point in change-friendly principle is ensure that leaders stand clearly and conspicuously behind the initiative, right? You want to show as a leader that you're supporting it, not that you're forcing it down everyone's throat. The next principle is the social principle. And here, we really are talking about how complex change may start with a mandate, like the leader decides, we're going to have this change. But it usually succeeds through what we call social contagion, meaning one person gets interested and is committed to it, and it passes on to someone else because other people say, wow, that's really changing and I like what you're doing. So that kind of social contagion is really critical, and it really needs to involve more than 25% of the potential participants in the initial stages. So actively work to involve them, so it doesn't have to be everyone doing it at the beginning, but at least you must have more than 25% of your entire school population working on this. Also make room for partial participation. Not everyone is willing to jump into it right off the bat. So allow people to say, I'm interested, but I'm not sure I want to jump into it. I like to just wait and see. Nudge people forward, give them encouragement towards fuller participation rather than forcing them. And by saying that, this is something you have to do, right, by the end of the year. Also, accept that there will be critics and skeptics, whenever change happens. Respect them, keep them in the conversation, and try to find ways that you can respond productively to their concerns, whether it is inviting them into a conversation with you, whether it is, allowing them to express their reservations in a school meeting. All these are ways to acknowledge them, to respect them, and to make them feel that what they're saying matters. Another important point for the social principle is to encourage collective, collaborative decision-making. Right? And we're not saying only in the small things. Really, it is, you have to allow them to be able to make some big decisions with your participation as well, because that makes it clear that the project is not the leader's project, but it's everyone's project. And finally, it's important to foster a sense of collective responsibility. Let them know if this works, it's working because we all did it, rather than it works because I told you to do it. So that's the social principle. Moving on, we look at the visibility principle. What does this mean? Basically, you have to try to keep the change or the innovation really at the forefront of everyone's minds, right? So you make visible step by step how everything is going on. One of the first things you could do is to establish a regular big picture review and act cycle, right? What this means is that maybe every 2 weeks or every month, you have very clear when something is going to happen, where it's going to happen, and what is happening, right? Keep the initiative on people's minds all the time. You could also make what's happening visible through conversations. So one-on-one, in the tuck shop or the canteen, in small group conversations during meetings, you could put that as an agenda item. You could also display the initiative on whiteboards, on charts, or whatever it is in the school so that everyone knows what's going on. Another way to do this is to use conversational structures that draw out the quiet voices. Remember, just because someone's not talking doesn't mean that they have nothing to say, right? Actively invite them into the conversation with you. Allow the quiet voices to come to the foreground, while sometimes inviting the loud ones to step back. Also, keep everyone aware of progress. Let them know when something is drifting. Acknowledge that when an initiative seems to be in competition, and also attend to unanticipated side effects. Whether or not people are participating in the initiative, it is important that they know what's going on. And finally, for the visibility principle, try to foster a common language and a common understanding. Everyone should know what it is all about, and everyone should have a real good understanding of what it is. One way that really works is to get people to explain to you what they think the initiative is all about. That would be actually a good way to test how much they know and where the misunderstandings or the misconceptions are. The last principle is one that's not often talked about, is what we call the emergence principle. And what this really means is that there are going to be a lot of things that are unexpected when you are shepherding change, in an organization. You cannot be prepared for them all. So be comforted in the fact that these are things are going to happen, and all you can do is to basically watch for positive developments and encourage them, right? But at the same time, keep an eye out for things that are not working, like backsliding, erosion, drift, tokenism. Tokenism refers to when people are just saying, yes, we are doing this change, but nothing is really happening. Also look out for unexpected side effects. But what happens that's really critical is to keep an eye on the unexpected, and to be very, very cautious about responding too quickly. Sometimes you need to let something play out over time for a while, because it can straighten out and become more positive than negative. Right? Jumping right into trying to solve a problem immediately is not usually the best thing to do. Right? So that's the emergence principle. What I've shared with you are the 4 broad principles to shepherding change in a complex organizational change in an ecological manner. An important thing for you to notice, right? Let me just stop sharing my screen so that I can talk to you again. Right. So let me end by saying this. What I've done with you so far is to share with you how we can shepherd change that's complex and usually happens in a very large organization, right? And it will involve many participants. However, if you are having change only within a department, feel free to trim it down, because that kind of change may involve smaller groups, smaller teams, and individuals may play more than one role, and some roles that I've mentioned are really not relevant. So it's fine. Right? What's important is for you to understand that there are these 4 principles that welcome you to try, and that allow you to try to look at change in a very different way. You might not try every single thing that I've listed down, but trying some of them will matter, and will give you information about what seems to be critical in the way that you're handling change. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that this made sense to you. I had to do it really quickly, and I have to acknowledge that this is new to me as much as it is to you. And I hope that you will register for the 3 Future of Learning webinars. And I look forward to engaging with you and your ideas on March 30th, which is the session that I will be running from 9 to 10 p.m. Hong Kong time. Until then, everyone, please take good care of yourselves and be safe at all times.